to do this. So this is the final session. I'll be talking for 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open up to general question and answer. We were thinking of having a panel and getting into changing the chairs around a little bit, and having a discussion review of whatever questions we'd like to take up here. As I said at the very beginning, and it seems to me that these 3 days really have illustrated that a 3-day event can only begin to broach large topics.
We're convinced.
Yeah. Okay, good. I imagine many people came convinced before it even began. But I mean, you could see that we could take little stanzas or little parts of this masterwork and spend great lengths of time on them. And I do think that that's what the future holds. I think that this work is going to be monumental in the impact that it has on the whole world. And I woke up about 4 o'clock, and I was thinking, well, what should I say in this? And instead of generalities or reviewing what we've talked about, since we'll have further occasion in a minute, I wanted to look a little, this thought has been with me for a number of years. The world, might be assumed that an avatar would have his impact by filtering out into the world and into the world culture and gradually moving that way. But you know what I actually think is more true is that the circle of his lovers absorbs the world. His family gulps the world, you might say. And it's not so much our responsibility to make Baba palatable or to sell Baba to the world or anything like that, but to build a world, a culture, a community, a culture, I'm using the word culture this weekend, that is truly built on him and dedicated to him. And that will absorb the world in the course of time. And this may sound like a funny example, but I don't want to get into modern, contemporary political events here, but I will allude, you're aware that so much divisiveness has come about as the result of the Sunni-Shia conflict over the course of history. Where did that come from? It came from a conflict connected with Muhammad's immediate family. Ali, his disciple, and his followers felt that he had been denied his appropriate role as Muhammad's successor. Okay, without getting into any questions about that and what the proprieties of it, in the early days of Islam conquered Egypt, one of the great cultures of the world, conquered the whole coast to the Atlantic, overthrew Syria, Israel, overthrew Iran within 20 years. Wouldn't you think that process would have generated a lot of resentments that would have been remembered long after? Who thinks about that now? What people worry about is a conflict within the family of the immediate followers of the Avatar, not all these huge empires that family overthrew. And that goes to me as an illustration that what happens within the immediate circle of the Avatar has tremendous consequences that go way beyond what one should imagine. So I feel our job is really to stay with God, everything to be built on Him. We can reach out. It's a good thing to reach out, as one feels prompted to do. But Baba will bring the world. The culture that we build should be built on Him. And Francis's work is going to be quite foundational in moving us, in helping to move to embrace many cultural questions and cultural dimensions of this. So I just wanted to, I was thinking, just to mention two areas, two large topic areas into which Francis in Stay with God opened up in a way that hasn't been done before, and some ways that we can go, those who are interested in these things, we can explore further. And I wrote them out here. One is the heroic, and the other is, I'm using this phrase, axis mundi. I'll just say 5 minutes worth of each of these. There's a lot of stuff that I could bring up from Stay with God, and on another occasion maybe we could look at some of that. But Francis has brought the heroic strain into his poem in a major way, all over the place. Odysseus, Achilles, a lot of the Greek heroes, that kind of thing. And that, apart from Francis, I can't think of who else within the Bible world has done that. We don't typically think of the heroic epic and warriors and battle as part of the culture that the Baba has given us. But he has made it so.
Alaba.
And Alaba, okay. Francis and Alaba were on the same. But Alaba was more of a doer.
He was very keen on those ancient Persian heroes.
Yes, yeah. Well, and there are, in fact, I'll just pull up one slide of the zillion. I got up early and caught all this material, and there'll be more. I'll go through it now. But look at the way that he characterizes the involutionary process, and this is in the third book of Stay with God, the one that recapitulates, that speaks. This is once the Jivatma has begun the inward turn. No longer can he be countered to man, but is a hero unthinkably great and unimaginable in feats, with the weapons of pent waters in his hands, and the roar of waters in his soul. But also great is the enemy. Look, he's in martial terms, heroic martial terms he's using to characterize the involutionary journey. If he falls, he dies a hero's death, and the battle maidens bear him to a hero's reward. But if he sustains the war and bears on gloriously, and God and his Guru guard him and pour into his soul divine grace and into his limbs unmatchable strength, he wins the first circle of the seven-circled citadel of God. So he's using the image of a warrior conquering a fortress. And many, many other passages in here. Look at the way that image he uses in this passionate lyrical expression in the love song of John Kerry. Let's see. The far-shadowing spear of his glance, Baba, thou beloved. That is strict. When I was a scholar, my field was heroic literature. Homer and Beowulf, Old English literature. This is straight from Homer, from the Iliad, as a matter of fact. Achilles, especially, killing people with a spear. Now look at how he characterizes his experience, or John Kerry's experience of love. Nursing his wound, never healing, but widening, because the spearhead remained in it. Being killed by the spearman. That's how he's characterizing the agony of love. Widening and love festering. So how do you say that word?
Sloughing.
Sloughing. That's right. Sloughing off veil flesh. Widening cleanly in the spearhead of bliss. Entering more deeply into the flesh veils, etc., etc. It's being killed by a spear, by a greater warrior on the battlefield. Now, we could say this is the true jihad, which is the war against one's lower self. He's appropriated this into his discourse, which becomes part of, well, I mean, it wouldn't just be Francis who's done this, but within the Baba world, more him than anyone else, it can become part of our language. And look at the history of the past Advents. The Ramayana, it's like a third of it is about war. The Mahabharata, the whole thing centers on a huge war. The Bhagavad Gita, what is it about? Arjuna, the greatest warrior of his time, says, I won't fight, and Krishna convinces him that he should. Now, this isn't, I mean, obviously I'm not championing that we should all become warriors, and since we're failing to convert the world through any other means, try that. But it's that inner war against one's lower self. And he's brought this into our mythos, let's say, our mythology, the mythology on which our community and our culture can be constituted. There's a beautiful, I wish we had the time for this because I love this, but Gunnar. In fact, I don't want to run over time. So I'm going to 4:15. I'll read this one. It's from the Njál saga, which is probably the greatest of all the Icelandic sagas. A man will journey so far and then quietly, or in a heroic spasm, examine what he has collected. And say with Gunnar. Now Gunnar is one of the greatest heroes of the Njál saga. Njál is kind of like a sage and a saint. But Gunnar was the greatest warrior of his age. And here's the story connected with him. He is a character of great nobility. They're kind of farmers in Iceland, but they did a lot of fighting, and then when they got a vacation, they would go raiding in Europe and sack monasteries and bring treasure back home. I'm not kidding, that really is the lifestyle that the Njál saga talks about. But Gunnar never provoked any fights at all, but because of his greatness, people kept picking fights with him. And he got embroiled in one feud after another. And in this legal system there, you would go to the Althing in the summer, and if you killed someone, if you would pay a certain sum of money, the whole thing would be settled. Well, this went on and on and on, and finally it got to the point where Njál, who knew the future, and Gunnar knew this, told him, you will have to, the order was he would have to leave Iceland for 3 years as punishment. But after that, Njál said, if you come back, you'll live to an old age, you'll be gloriously successful and die peacefully. So Gunnar knew that that was true. But look at actually what happens. It's a beautiful, moving passage in the Njál saga. He's about to go. He's actually on his horse going down to the boat, and the horse trips and he falls off, and he looks up and he sees the fields all ripe for harvesting. And they look so beautiful to him, and he says, I won't go. I won't go. And he stays back, and he becomes thereby an outlaw, which means that he can be killed with impunity. And he's killed, and he dies. And he knew fully well that that was going to happen. It's one of the great moments. It's hard for me to express how moving it is in the context of this great saga. So this is what Francis brings up, and he spends a whole stanza on it. And he has collected, and say with Gunnar, this is my fall. Now, I will not journey anywhither to satisfy obsolete law. Fair is my house, set fair in the meadows, and the corn ripe to harvest. Soon will this house be laid in ruins. You see, Gunnar knows that his house, he's actually attacked in his house and killed in it. Under the great battle, and she whom my soul loved betray me for small spite. This is reference to something that happened then. Great glory there would be for me in fulfillment of their law. But I, undefeated yet in fight, am weary of men's honor and am called by God to the battlefield of Sigurd and the other great heroes, pressing strenuously the way back to our Father. You know, in a number of places, Francis will say, finally, after the, many, many lifetimes in human form, you take your stand in the waters. You take your stand and begin the journey back. That's what this is about. Gunnar is taking his stand and says, enough has been far too much. I won't follow these obsolete laws anymore. I'm going to take the road to God. This is the true heroic. This is true heroism that Francis is describing. And he's brought it into our language and into our mythology uniquely, so far as I can see. I don't know any other one in the world who has, except for Oliver, as you mentioned.
It's often seen that the very mainspring of myth is the human need to attain some sort of values which will go beyond death, which will somehow be stronger than the death that's inevitably going to overtake us. Something will be more valuable. And this is the case with mythic heroes all the way through. And I think Francis is the first person who's brought that into the whole avataric and sacred narrative.
That's right, in our Baba world.
Yes.
So, if we want to take this further, I mean, Francis Brabazon is not the end of this story. He's the beginning of it in terms of our Baba culture. Okay, an obvious place to go is the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata. I mean, apart from anything more that we may create on our own. But if we just want to study other things in culture, he doesn't talk much about the great heroes of the Mahabharata or the great heroes of the Ramayana or Muhammad's own life. And who knows what other things we can, we don't always have to go back to history, we can create things afresh. Okay, there much more I could say about Odysseus and his wanderings, but I want to turn to this idea of the axis mundi, which is where the poem starts and where the poem ends. And this is a very ancient theme. The axis of the world. The Stay With God starts with it. Wings towards the glaciers of Kailas. Yeah, there's a picture of Mount Kailas, by the way. I'll show you more. But we've had, this has, of course, been quoted a number of times this weekend, as well it should be. Wings towards the glaciers of Kailas where the first fathers nourished the seed of God, and Shiva gentled Ganga, and Parvati walked by streams of living heart, and so forth. So now this isn't an illusion that anyone, I mean, I never heard of anyone else talking about it in the Baba world until Francis did. It has a vast, reference in sacred history and in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in Jainism, all these different things, which I won't take the time to go over. Here's what the mountain looks like, by the way. It's up in western Tibet, and it's a very inaccessible place. And here is a picture of this. I know you can't see it very well. I had a whole bunch of pictures, and then I misplaced them. This little lake, Garakund, which is maybe one of the most sacred places in it. Francis spends a whole stanza with a story that is directly related. Now, this is almost like, this is the sacred axis, the vertical axis from the horizontality of human life up to God. He begins there, and notice book 5 is God-man as world axis. It's the perfect man as that. He's beginning with a mountain in that respect. This, I'll read this out. It's the sun, I'll say, this is straight from the Holy Mountain, which is by a marvelous account of someone from the 20th century who had this experience. The sun was setting over Sri Kailas. I bowed to the 4 directions, spread my tiger skin on the ice, planted my staff on the right and cried, "Victory to the Lord, my master." Then sat in Siddhasana facing north, fixing his glorious image between my eyes. This is Dattatreya, who he's devoted to, Lord Dattatreya. Cruel winds, bitter cold, snow up to my chest, but unbounded love defeated these enemies. On the 3rd day, Lord Dattatreya, in his physical form, came to me, picked me up as a child and caressed me. Manas merged into Antakarana, Antakarana into Chitta, Chitta into Buddhi, into Ahamkara, and all into the Satchidananda of the Supreme Self. There's in fact this morning I copied it out. This is right from his book, where he describes this whole experience in a deeply, deeply moving account of someone who seems to have had a high order spiritual experience at Mount Kailas, at that little pond, Gaurakund, at the base of it.
And what time frame would roughly?
This would be like about 1900. It's quite modern, as a matter of fact. And all those terms that Francis uses, I mean, he knows what he's talking about. manas merges into antakarana. Had we 3 days to spend on this topic, I would beat you up with this chart. Here you see antakaran, buddhi, ahankara, manas, all those different terms. This is a very technically precise description of the merging into God, as a matter of fact. So, look at how packed this is. This is filling out the sacred reference that he has in the very first stanza of the entire book. Okay, another whole manifestation, another whole poetic line connected with this axis mundi, this vertical axis, is the tree. And we talked a bit about this the other day. In book 3, when Francis is going through the divine theme for different times, in one of them he starts talking about it as a tree. In fact, it becomes the wishing tree that produces all fruits. This too is a very ancient and archetypal image. If we wanted to explore it further in future, over the decades to come, one would be looking at these different stanzas within the poem itself. How about this? Have you ever looked at this closely? Notice the tree here? This looks very much like Edenic, does it not? The Garden of Eden? Maybe somebody can...
The snake gives it away.
Yeah. Maybe somebody can figure out what the heck this chart means. This would be another place. The Bhagavad Gita has a fabulous couple lines on the world tree. It's actually an upside down tree, and you have to attack it as it roots and kill it in order to realize God. In Christian tradition, it's often said that Jesus died on a tree. The cross is often characterized that way. There's a wonderful Old English poem called The Dream of the Rood, and the rood means cross. And it's speaking as a tree who has the terrible, unwilling burden of having to crucify Christ. He doesn't want to at all. The cross himself speaks. Deeply moving. I'm talking about some of the ways that this could be further explored, you see. Some of the further directions one could go with Stay With God as a basis on a theme that he's brought up. At the end of the whole book, Francis comes to God-man as world axis. Well, how about the word kutub? You know the word kutub, right? It's the Islamic word, and it's used with reference to certain individuals who become the world axis or the pole. It means a perfect master. It is the same figure of the verticality, the vertical axis within the horizontal dimension of human gross consciousness. And this brings to mind, to me, the idea that Meher Baba has explained for the first time that I know of in spiritual history about the significance of the human form. What do we have? 2 minutes, so I'll read this. Though there are millions of nominal forms which the soul has to pass through before it can incarnate in the human form, yet, strictly speaking, there is only one form, viz. The human form, from the beginning to the end. Every form is the human form, Baba has said. And why? Just before the human form is latent, this is a misprint within the text itself, in all the human forms, including the electron. But in order that the human form may be completely manifested, the soul has to pass through all the different countless forms. In other words, the different forms in the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms are nothing but the human form in its latent state. And elsewhere, Baba explains that the human form at first is lying down. As a plant, it stands on its head. Then as a worm, it's on its belly. And finally, it rises up until, as human form, we're upright. We've achieved the vertical axis. And the Sufi term that Ibn Arabi uses for the kutub, or the perfect master, is al-insan al-kamal, the perfect man. So it seems to me that this is the consummate term Francis has used for this axis mundi that links with all the other references throughout the entire poem, from the Mount Kailas at the very beginning to the figure of the tree that comes up so prominently in Book 3. These are some of the directions, and you could see that to explore all of this will take a long time, you know, or it's rich, it's very fertile creative ground. As we build a culture based on the revelations of this new avatar, these are some of the treasures that are right there for our pickings. And I think that Francis has really been the leader in this, and it's always a problem in building a culture, what to bring in and what not to. You know, there are so many, there are 1,000,001 varieties of poison out there. Turn on the television, you know, it's all full of false values everywhere. How do we discriminate? Well, I think that Francis has given us good guidance by being such an SOB. He would just cut things down. In other words, yeah, we have to be fearless. We have to reject things that do not have a place in this hall that we are building for him. At the same time, the materials are so rich and so beautiful and so deeply creative, so that 100, 200, 300 years from now, I think the culture that may have blossomed on the foundations of this latest advent will be something quite beautiful beyond our imagining right now. Okay.